Hello there. In this class we are going to create an application that is going to demonstrate SQLite databases, and today we are specifically going to perform insert operation on our database. So what am I going to do in this video? I'm going to create an application with a front end somehow like this. I'm going to have two edit texts, and then I'm going to have a button. I'll write some text in these edit texts, and I'll click on this button. So these two data shall be stored in my database. But for doing that, I'm going to use a third-party class. Let's say this one was my main activity. So I'm going to use a third-party class. Let me name this class a database helper class. I'll get back to this class. This class will get the data from main activity, and this will be responsible to store my data inside my SQLite database. So what is actually going to happen in this class? So this class is going to contain a couple of methods. This class is going to contain a method named as onCreate. Another method will be defined in this class that is going to be onUpgrade method. Another method that I'm going to define in this class is onAddRecord method. Now these two methods are compulsory methods. These two methods shall always be defined inside this database helper class. Now this class, this name I've written here, this is an optional name. You can modify it according to your interest. Okay. Now these two must be defined in this class, but this method shall not be defined in this class. I mean, this is not compulsory. You can define it if you want. If you cannot define it if you don't want. So I'm defining this class to add data in my database. So I'm defining this method to add data in my database. So what is the use of these two methods? OnCreate method is going to be used to create our tables. We can use these to create tables. If I'm going to upgrade my version, I'm going to write code in my database on upgrade method, and if I'm going to add records in my table, I'm going to use this method. Now this method is a user defined method, and these two methods are library methods. Now what does an onCreate method contains? If I come to the onCreate method, what does an onCreate method contains? Let's say this is my onCreate method. So the onCreate method shall contain a couple of things. First of all, I'll define a string that is going to store my query. Let's say I need to write some query, right? Create table and blah 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 to create a table for my database. So I can write this query inside this string to use it further. So to create this query, or to create this table, or to run this query, what am I going to do? I am going to use a method that is known as execute SQL method. Inside this method I am going to write this query. Now what will happen from here? According to this query, a table must be created in my database. So this is the code that I am going to write inside my onCreate. Now I am going to ignore onUpgrade in this video, but in onAddRecord method, the method that I am going to define, you can change this name according to your use. I'll define some parameters here. Now this depends upon the number of values I'm going to insert in my table. If my table has 1 2 3 4 columns, I would define something like this. Let's say I'm going to insert ID here. Let's say I'm going to insert name here. Let's say I'm going to insert age here and marks here. I would create separate variables for these. Actually, these are catching variables that have been sent from the callee of this method. So inside this method I'm going to need two instances. One instance would be of SQLite Database class. This is a library class, SQLite Database DB. This is the instance, and I'm going to add a method here that is get a writable method, as I'm going to get a writable database, as I'm going to write my database. Actually I'm going to write some data in my database. So one thing that I'm going to need is DB. The second thing that I'm going to need is going to be content values. There's a class name as content values. This is this is pretty much similar to array lists. I'm going to insert some data inside here, and after that I can get that data to my database. So creation of instance for this one is pretty much similar. Content values and the constructor of content value, simple. Now I have a put method that I'm going to use to insert my data inside the content values. Let's say I have written id here, so I'm going to write id and I'm going to insert the value here. So how does the data stores in content values? The data stores in a key value form. So you write some key here and you give it some value. So this is how I can insert all my data in my content value database, and at the end I'm going to write an insert method inside which I can write my database name, and one parameter must be left null. I'll tell you what that is in the in further courses in the further time. And then I'll give my CV here. So this is how I'm going to write some code in my on add record method. Now I hope you have understood a little bit here, but if you haven't understood anything here, you will definitely get to know better in your code. So from here I'm going to switch to my code. Now going to my code. Now this is the code. Now I've created some predefined front end because I don't want to waste our time. So if you see here, I've created two edit texts. One is asking us for customer name and the other one is asking us for customer age, and then I have an insert button. I'll write some data here, and whenever I press insert button and when I click it, the data must be stored in my database. That's all we are going to do in this video. So I've written some code here to define these things. I've given some IDs, et customer name, et customer age, and this is my insert button. So first of all, the thing I'm going to do is to make some reference. So I have got some buttons here, so I'm going to define some buttons here too. I've got two edit texts, so I'm going to create two edit texts here, one for customer name and one for customer age. So these are the three things that I'm going to reference here. Now what am I going to do here? Insert button equal to, I'm going to map them with the front end r.id.insert button, and just like that, et customer name equal to find view by id r.id.customer age, sorry, customer name. So just like that, et customer age equal to find view by id r.id.et customer age. So this is how I'm going to map these things between each other. So now to implement my button, I'm going to write some code here. Insert button dot set on click listener, new view on click listener. So here's my on click listener. So I'm going to write the code here from which I can add my data in my database. So as I said, I'm going to need a third-party class which is going to help me to put my data inside my database. So from the projects in the same package, I'm going to create a new Java class. In my case, I'm going to name it database helper or DB helper. So whatever name you want to give it, you can give it from here. So I pressed enter. Now there's a property of this class. This third-party class will always extend a class, a library class, that is what SQLite open helper class. This is what this class is going to do. This will always extend this class. So I'm performing inheritance here, but you can see that this there's a red underline below this line. So what am I going to do? I'm simply right clicking on it. I'm going to show the content actions. So this is recommending me to implement methods. So it means that this is, if I'm going to extend this SQLite open helper class, I would need to implement some methods of this class. So if I click on this one, this is asking me to implement these two methods. I said okay. So now look, I've implemented on create method and I've implemented on upgrade method. These are the two methods that I was trying to tell you in the theory part, where I was trying to explain things to you. So these are the two methods. This will be used to create my database or my tables, and this will be used to create my versions, to update my versions here. It is still red here. If I right click on this one, it will ask me to create a constructor. So if I right click on it, I can simply select the first one. I'll click OK. So to make things simpler for you, I'll remove some of the code here. I have removed this one. I have only left context here. Here I'm going to write the database name that I'm going to give to my database. So let's say I'm going to give a name customer.db. So I'll recommend you guys to leave this part null, and you can simply write here 1 as this is the first version of my application. So this is all you're going to do in your constructor. So coming down here in the onCreate method, I told you guys that here you create your tables. So to create my table, I'll create a string. Let's say I'm going to name this string query string, and inside this string I'm going to define my query that is going to help me create my table. So after that, what will I do? If you can see here, there is a class, a local instance of SQLite database is created here. So I can use this db to execute my SQL using this method, execute SQL method, where I can write my query string, and if I run this code, if I run this onCreate method, this query will be applied, will be processed, and the table will be created. So to create my table, I'm going to write my query here, create table. In the table name, I'm going to write customer table, and after that I'll start a parenthesis, and inside the parenthesis I would define my first item that is going to be, let's say I'm going to name this one column ID. This is of integer type, and this will be the primary key, and I'm imposing auto increment on this one. So this was my first element. For the second element, what am I going to do here? For the second one, let's say I'm going to have a customer name. So I'm going to write column. The names are on you. You can decide any name. Column customer name, and this is going to be text type, and the next one is going to be column customer age, and this is going to be again integer type. So this is how I have created an SQL query right here, which is going to help me create 3 items, 3 columns. One is going to be the ID, the second one is going to be the customer name, and the third one is going to be the customer age. So if I execute this SQL query, one table with 3 columns will be created for me in my database. But as I can use these names further in my class, so it is recommended to not write them like this. I can simply select these. I should create strings of these right here globally so that I can use them further in my code. So simply I'm going to select this one, I'm going to right click on it, I'm going to go on the refactor. If I click on something like introduce constants, and if I press enter, you can see that here a string is created with the name customer table, and this string is now stored there. So this means that I can, whenever I need to access this string, I can access it from anywhere in this class and outside this class too. So look, now it has performed some concatenation here, and after that I'm going to do the same with this one too, because I can use this one also in my further codings too. So I'm going to right click on this, I'm going to go on a refactor, and I'm going to introduce constants of this one too, and I'm going to press enter. So the same thing I'll perform with this one. Right click on this one, and I'll go on refactor, introduce constants, yes. And I think there was one more thing here, the field name that I've defined for age. I'm going to right click here, I'm going to go on a refactor, introduce constants, enter. Now I'm all done. Now if you see here, now I've got, look, I've got 1 2 3 4 strings. One is storing my table name, and the other 3 are storing my column names. So I can use these things in my further codes. So I'm going to ignore this one. So now I'm going to create another method that is going to be completely user defined method. I'm going to create this method to insert my data inside my table. So let's say I'm going to create that table here. So I'm going to say public boolean add record method. So this is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to create a method which has a return type boolean. Now why is it boolean? Whenever I'm going to call it from main activity, it's going to return true or false, meaning that if it returns true, it has successfully inserted in the database, and if it returns false, it means that it hasn't returned anything here. So if you can see that it is currently red, so to prevent from that one, I'm going to write return true for now. I can modify it later. So what am I going to do here? As I told you in the other part, I'm going to create SQLite database instance here, SQLite database db equal to, I'm going to write get, sorry, I'm going to write this dot get writable database. So before writing this, I'm going to tell you, now we have two options here. Now one is get writable database and one is get readable database. So if you want to use this method to just retrieve some data from your database, in that case you are going to use this one. But as I'm going to insert some data, that means that I'm going to write the data inside my database, so I'm going to select the first option. So I click semicolon here, and then I'm going to need one more thing, and that is what content values, that is going to be storing my data before inputting it to my database. So I'm giving it a name content values, simply new content values, nothing is going to be inside there. So after that, I'm going to put things here. Now I need some things inside this record. So what are going to be those things? One is going to be id, so I'd say integer id. The other one is going to be string, and let's say cname. The third one is going to be integer, and it's going to be not cname, it was ch. Now I'll read these three things from my main activity. As I said, main activity will share its data with the db helper activity. So this is the place where the db helper activity is going to take the data from there. So now what am I going to do here? I'm going to put my string. So I already have the table names. Now look, I can use two things. I can insert two things here. One is going to be the key, the other one is going to be the value. So the key is definitely going to be the column name. So I have defined my column names here, if you remember, column id, column customer name, column fala fala fala. So the first one is going to be column id, and inside column id I'm going to write this thing id here that I have received from my main activity. So I'm going to write id here, and for the next one I'm going to I'm going to insert. So I think I'm sorry, I don't need to do this because I have already auto incremented this one, but let's keep it that way. Let's keep it here. So for the second one, I'm going to use column customer name, and here I'm going to write cname, which I have received from my main activity. And in the third one, I'm going to write column customer age, and this is going to be customer age. So this is how I have put all of my data inside the content values. Now one more thing I need to do right here is that I'm going to use this db instance here to insert my content values data in my database. So I'm going to do db.insert, and inside here, first of all, I would write my table name, which is what? Customer table. So the second part is going to be null. Just leave it null, don't try to understand everything. And the third part one is going to be the control, the instance of content values. So this is how I'm going to write this code, but this will recommend me to store this value inside a boolean value, so that it is going to tell me that is my code right or not. So I'm going to define a simple if instruction here. If insert is equal to -1, return false. This means that the insert will be negative when the data is not inserted in the database. So if it is not inserted in the database, then return false, and else return true. Else means if the data is inserted in the database, then in that case you need to return true. So currently I've got two return statements here, so I'm going to remove this one. So this is how I can add data inside my database. So this is how that's all you need to do inside your database helper class. Now I'm going back to my main activity, where I'm going to call these database helper class methods. So I have created my method. So I have created my table here using this execute SQL statement, and I have written some code here to add data inside my database. So all I need to do is that get the data here. So I haven't sent any data here. So what am I going to do? I'm going to get here. So inside this onClick method, I'm going to define a db helper instance. Now if I see here, if I see its constructor, you can see that I've passed only one thing inside the constructor, which is what? The context. So I'm going to do what? I'm going to create a database helper instance. I'm giving it a db helper. I'm giving the name db helper to my instance and equal to new db helper. Inside this I'm going to provide the context of my activity. So I'm good to go now. So simply db helper class is going to help me to call the method that I have defined to insert my data inside db helper class. So what am I going to do? db helper dot add record method. So inside this one I'm going to give an id, a string name, and then an integer. So for id I'm going to give simply 1. This will be auto incremented by my database. For the cname I'm going to give the string here that I've got from the user, which is where here et cname. So I'm going to write et cname, our customer name dot get text, get text dot toString. Now what will happen here? This et name will help us in getting, I'll get the text from et name, which is the first edit text in my application, and I'll convert it into a string. For the second one I'll also do the same things for et customer age dot get text dot toString. But now you will see that this one is going to be red here. Why? Because there is an error here. Why? Because it is returning a string data, and if you go to the database helper class, I have written here an integer data, because age is integer data, right? So I am simply converting this whole thing into integers by integer dot parse int method. I can simply enclose these in the parentheses of parse int method, and now I'm good to go. I'm happily inserting my data. I'm converting my string into integer using integer dot parse int method. Now this is I've completed the thing here, but it will always recommend me to create this thing also inside a boolean variable. So let me name this boolean variable success, as this is going to identify that whether I've completed my insert operation or not. So if success is true, in that case I'm going to create a toast message which will say that success is true. If it is true, then this will also display true here, right? So in other case, if something else has happened, I will simply write else toast and error occurred. So I think now I'm good to go. Now if you see here, I've simply called this method with some data. So this will send the data from here to the database helper class, and here this part of code will deal with this data, and this part will insert my content values data inside my database. Now let's run it and see if it is working or not. So as you can see, the application is currently installed in my device. So I can write some data here, John, and I'm going to give him some age. I'm going to click on insert, and it is saying success true. So this means that look, we have successfully inserted data inside our table. So but how do we know that the data is currently inserted in our table? So for that I can go to my device explorer. In my device explorer, I've already opened it right now. You can go to the data. Here on data you can go to data again. There's another folder. From here you can go and find your package name. Look, my package name is com.example.mydb. so I'm trying to find the com.example.mydb. so it's going to be somewhere com.example.mydb. look, it's right here. Inside here I have a folder named database. in database I have a file my database.db, but if I double click on it I cannot open it here. So what am I going to do? I'm going to save as, and I'm going to save it somewhere else. For example, I'm going to save it inside C. I think I had a folder named my database. Yeah, inside this folder I'm going to save it. Okay, so I can minimize it. I can go to my C and I can find it there. This is my database, and this is my database here. But if I cannot open it just like this, so I need to download a software that is with the name SQLite browser, which is right here. You can simply go, you can simply search on Google SQLite browser, download. You can get the first link there. You can download it from here, from there. So simply I can double click and open it, and I can open my that file from here. So I can simply go to open database, and here I'm going to tell this the place where I'm going to fetch my data from. My database is, and here's my database, and if I click on it, look, now it has fetched my database here. So this one is your table, look, customer table. If I open it, I can see the table columns here, but if I want to see the data, I can simply click on this one, and look, this is my data here. I was trying to test after before telling you guys. So this is the output. You can see the data has been successfully inserted in our table, and this is how you can see that whether your data is still in your table or not. So in the next video, we are going to fetch these data back from this database, and we can show this one on the screen, of the mobile user. So I think that is it from here. If you have any question or query, you can leave a comment, or you can mail us on our Gmail ID. Thank you from here.